He has wiped out by his grace through faith in Christ your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 84 of the Pastor Discussions Podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joe. This is your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
So we moved the studio around, my office. We basically just reorganized some stuff because I had
Basically, all that happened is you cleaned and then
I did.
We just scooted chairs and a couch up.
Yeah.
To...
So the
Oh, okay. I got you moved. The mixer.
The mixer was on my desk, and it was just getting really annoying because I wanted to use this really cool reading prop thing that I have and be able to type.
Time.
Yeah. So I wanted to be able to have it in front of my keyboard to be able to type while I was reading, and this massive mixer was getting in the way, and so I had I had a Jenny moment. That's what I'm going to Is it a Jenny or a Carly moment? I don't know which one, but they're both they love cleaning and organizing. And so I came in earlier this week and I just reorganized my whole office and moved that thing off of there and onto this little bench here in front of my desk, and then tried to figure out how we could still record. But now as we started doing this, we realized I don't have a computer screen in front of me, so I can't
that's what
look anything up.
So
so I've got a laptop now and we're figuring this out. But it feels like Casual Friday now because I'm sitting in a couch as opposed to the chair behind the desk, and I can actually see you as opposed to having clutter.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we actually want to see each other.
Yeah.
So
and we'll also see how long it lasts before this clean phase goes out the window.
Yeah, that's true too.
So I've already got 2 massive books on but it's nice though because I have room on my desk to do stuff to put research or to books as I'm looking through stuff. Anyway,
I've never seen this much of the surface of your desk before. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think daylight has seen that much of the surface of my desk since I got it because there's all these little dust piles that I haven't quite gotten to yet because there was just stuff sitting there and dust accumulated. So now you can see all of the dust and it doesn't matter. New setup, and we had a couple of weeks where we missed.
Well, yes.
So
this has been
sorry about that.
An unusual
a month
phase in ministry and life in general. So
we thought we'd talk about that a little bit because you just preached last week on the story of Abraham and Isaac. And
do you ever this is a side note?
Yeah, that's what we do.
When people say the story, it makes it sound like it's does it not give the impression that it didn't actually happen? Does that bother you? I've noticed this even when I was typing up my manuscript. I wanted to say story, but I was like, okay, I don't want to use. I don't know why it just bothered me this time. Because we use that. Well, what about all the stories of the Old Testament as if they're not true?
Well, I guess you'd have to distinguish between mythical stories or folk stories or folk tales versus because you could tell a story about how you went on vacation, which is a true thing that happened. But I see what you're saying.
People
does it subtly undermine the authenticity of
so anyway, maybe that's
another conversation. This is what happens. You start relaxing.
I went through the narrative of
the narrative.
That was the term that I decided I wanted to use.
And I just got to poke at you because Abraham went up to Mordor.
Not Mordor.
Or no,
it's Moria.
Moria. Yeah, he went to the mines of Moria.
It only happened one time.
Sacrifice his son.
I said Moriah probably 5 or 6 times, and I only said it one time. And when I was working through my walkthroughs, I kept falling into
it's a Moria.
Moria.
It's drums in the dark.
So I was listening to my Bible app to try to get Moriah in my brain. And you know what? I actually felt pretty good for only saying it one time. I said it wrong one time.
That one time
it was the time. It was the time that I was reading the passage. That's the one time that I said it wrong.
Exactly.
When I read it as a whole, but Yeah.
They have taken the bridge and the second hall. We have barred the gates, but cannot hold them for long. The ground shakes. Drums in the deep. That's what I thought when you said that. That's all I could think about was Gandalf reading the. Anyway, nerd moment. So you talked about Abraham and Isaac, and one of your main point that you made in 3 different ways, I think, was that God refines us through difficulty, suffering, trials. And so I thought we could just talk about that a little bit, since it sort of plays off of your sermon from last week. So maybe what were some of the insights that you got in preparing for that sermon that maybe didn't make it into the sermon or were left on the cutting floor, like maybe it's a personal insight or something like that, like as far as suffering, difficulty, trials, and God's work in and through those things?
I don't really feel like I left anything out of this sermon. But I think a lot of, I didn't, so this text, when we went on vacation in July, the beginning of July, I wanted to refresh, because I think we've talked about this before, but we tend, especially as pastors, when we read scripture, there's like an agenda behind it.
Yeah.
Right. So I try to primarily do it to just see God and enjoy him more. But there's always this secondary thing that's driving it is, I can use this.
How would I teach this?
Yeah. Or this would be really helpful in a shepherding moment.
And I'm like, oh, this would be really good for so-and-so, or this would be really good for other people. Instead of just enjoying the fact that I've discovered it and like marinate on that for a minute.
Yeah.
It always, I see what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah,
we go right to that applicational piece of shepherding and pastoring. And so I really, when we were there, we were gone for 10 days. I wanted to try to lay that aside, and I did it pretty well for about 6 of the 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
And once, like the first day was hard, and then like the last 2 days leading back into going to work, it kind of went back into that. But in that time, this was one of the texts that I read through. I just was reading through the narrative of Genesis. That was one of the things that I was reading. And I got to this text, and it kind of brought me back to some of the things that we had gone through with Ian.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having a really hard time with the text. Like, I was like looking at it and saying, man, this is a really hard and almost like vindictive type of thing. That's where my brain was going to, of what God was asking Abraham to do. And it took marinating on it and going through it. And I wanted to preach the text because you can see the gospel implications. You can see what's going on. And I use this analogy in the sermon, but I get caught up. And this also came from a conversation that I had with a friend of mine just about a month ago, about in sermons, our job is not to distract people with the trees. It's not to preach around the trees, but it's to help them to see the forest behind the trees. And what I was getting distracted with was the trees of the narrative, of all the details. And man, that's harsh. That's a harsh thing. Why would a loving God ask a servant, his child whom he loves, to say, give me your greatest gift that I've given you, give it back to me. I don't want you to have it anymore. Like, that's how I was looking at that. And so as I worked through that, I think what came out of it was just, this is what I've seen, and I think this could be helpful to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'm honest too, just like the last, we should probably talk about this too, because this has an impact on maybe why that text came to mind, and why God had put that in my just in front of me. I mean, obviously I believe God's working all things together for our good. So he had me going, and why would I pick Genesis? There's a reason he had me walking through that. We've gone through like 6 weeks of you being in and out of the hospital. And you've been in pain and no answers. Your family's been working through that. So, and since you're the senior pastor here,
air quotes,
I think the body feels it in a different way too. Mm-hmm. So the body feels it, whether that's legitimate or not. That it's just the reality of how we function. So the whole body is working through and probably hurting alongside you. Not obviously not in the same way.
Thank goodness for everybody
Yeah.
involved that's not the case.
But I think we could all identify with that text too.
Yeah.
So I thought it was timely. But as far as like the exegetical piece of it, I think some of the main insights that I saw just were that God is like, we need to remember that God is always working.
Yeah.
And in the same way that we need to see past those trees and see the forest of the narrative in this text and throughout Scripture, we do the same thing in our lives.
Yeah.
We get caught up in what's going on, what's happening, the busyness of life. Why isn't God doing this? Why isn't God doing this? Or we see the nice things that God does, and we don't look past those things to see how He's working eternally, how He's always for us and He's for our good.
Or we
how
think He's absent when those nice things aren't happening.
Yeah, same thing. And I just like the picture of the gospel that we see in that God. I think I said in there. It's only been a week,
It's
but
been 5 days.
yeah. But like God not only provides for His for those who will have faith, like He provides what is needed to come to Him in faith, and He'll provide what is needed for the relationship to be restored. But we also see in there, I think it's specifically in verse 8, where Isaac is asking his father, like, well, where's the sacrifice?
Yeah.
Like, we've got all the stuff.
You
but
got to
there's
kind of
no-
like, real quick, like this is one of those texts where it helps to have Josh Gillespie reading it with you, because here's Isaac walking up a hill carrying the instrument of his own doom.
Yeah,
And
the wood.
He's
on
got the
his
wood
back.
stacked on his shoulders,
Yeah.
and he's like humping up this hill. Like, I know how this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
We're missing something here.
Yeah,
Dad,
whoa.
did you forget the goat? Like,
Yeah,
what the
like-
heck?
Right. So he's like, what's going on? And Abraham tells him on their way up there that God's going to provide
Yeah.
what he needs. And so Abraham had already come to the point where, and I kind of fleshed this out in the sermon, but he had that 3 days journey, and like the text doesn't say this, but I think you can read that Abraham had to get himself ready to do this.
Yeah.
Like this was the son in verse 2 whom he loves. And I love, sometimes reading a Bible app is really good because the guy that reads it in the ESV, he's got like this really bellowy voice. But he does such a great job of there's like the slight pause when God is talking to Abraham, and he says, take your son. And he pauses, whom you love. And he like,
Yeah.
he like, you can
Accentuates it.
Right. And you can feel the sorrow. Like, I think there's like when we read scripture too.
We ought to do a podcast on feeling while you're reading.
Right. So when
Seriously.
we read scripture, we just read it like dead.
It's like
super
the
fast.
Clear Eyes guy, Bueller. And God said to him, take your son whom you love. And yeah.
Yeah. Right. Or is that Ben Stiles? Is
Yeah,
that
Ben
his name?
Stein.
Yeah. Or Ben Stein. That's who it is. So you see that Abraham loves this son, and he really cares for him. And this was a hard ask.
Yeah.
And so I just think you see that God is providing, like God's working, God's providing, like see past the facts that God's asking him to do something hard, that he's going to take him on this journey, and see to the God that provides,
Yeah.
see to the God that's working for your good, no matter what the hard thing is in your life. So I think those were kind of the main thrust of the sermon. I've had like a crazy 5 weeks, so I was just trying to think back through the process of how I had arrived. But this was a longer one for me, like because I've been marinating on this text for a month and a half.
Yeah.
Basically when I had preached it, and I was going to preach it the second week you were out,
Mm-hmm.
and I changed my mind because I wasn't ready. And we went, Michaela and I went out for lunch that week, and I can't remember what she said anymore, but I was kind of sharing what I was feeling about that text about. This is just hard. This is a hard thing for God to ask. And I was even at that point getting caught up in those trees.
Mm-hmm.
And she said some specific things about just reminding me that Abraham had replaced God with his son.
Mm.
And that's the same thing that we do. And this is the same thing that Michaela and I did with our son Ian. Is he had become the center of our attention, and he become this gift that God had given us after a miscarriage. Pretty quickly, had become the center of our lives.
Yeah.
And well, I said in the sermon that Ian was struck with cancer, and I was specific to say that because, and I know you and I don't necessarily agree on this, but I don't necessarily think that God does not punish his people, and he does not inflict pain on people, but I think that's a cause of the fall and a cause of sin. But he uses that, and he's sovereign over that, to bring about a more full joy and a more full faith in his people. He's working those things together for our good. So I think I was just able to see that more clearly, and I think that text helped me see that more clearly, and it helped me look past the pain and the suffering and the hardship and look to what he was doing. And even if he would have said that it's time for him to come and be mine, or it was time for us to lose that gift, I think, and we've talked about this in another episode, I would have been fine giving that to him.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking in my preparation for that sermon, one of the things, and maybe you can talk a little bit about this, because I've seen this in our lives, and as friends, I see it in you as well as myself. But I said, there's a lot of things that pop up in our lives that become idols, and ministry or the church or how we function can become our idol. And so maybe talk a little bit, maybe that's a nice primer. I talked a long time. Maybe that's a good primer into maybe sharing a little bit about what you've walked through over the last 5 weeks, just with the in and out of the hospital, the constant pain, the hardship for your family, the people praying for you and coming alongside you, the not getting answers, and just having to say, you know what, and just maybe just a lot of time to think and to reflect. Like maybe share alongside that, like in that same vein, how you've seen past some of the trees of life into the narrative and into the forest of what God has for you.
Yeah. So, just short version is this started, for people that are listening, this started like a month ago, I guess. Little over a month. And, I just started having some abdominal pain and, couldn't figure out what it was. It got pretty bad. It got bad enough for me to go into the hospital.
Which means it's bad.
So I went into the hospital. I got admitted to York. They had me there for a few days, managed the pain, couldn't figure out what was going on. Went home, went to see a family practice doctor. Family practice doctor couldn't figure out what was going on, sent me to a specialist, a gastro specialist. Gastro specialist had no idea what was going on. In between that, went back into the ER because of the pain. They sort of managed the pain and then sent me home that night, and then ended up back at the ER a few days later here in York, and got admitted for basically 4 days or 3 days until they could do a endoscopy, colonoscopy, and check and see what's going on. That came back basically negative, and after that, after a couple days after that procedure, I was in pain again, like significant pain. And called our family practice doctor. He said to go into Lincoln. So I went into the Lincoln ER at Bryan, and like it was so bad that I had tears coming out of my eyes. That's how bad the pain was. Carly brought me in there. She had the girls, and I was like laying on the bed with tears coming out of my eyes because it hurt so bad while they were trying to get pain meds at work, because pain meds don't work on me apparently. And so anyway, ended up staying there for 5 days. In Lincoln. They ran a whole bunch of different tests trying to figure out what was going on. They ruled out all the big bad stuff, like it's not cancer, it's not appendicitis, it's not pancreatitis, it's not this, it's not that, it's not this, it's not that, but no answer as to what it was. And basically we're just putting a Band-Aid on the pain to try to keep it under control. And so thankfully, I'm out of the hospital now, obviously, and the pain subsided. It's sort of going away. I was talking with Jeff, my friend from Missouri, on the phone the other day, and I told him I'm not convinced that God didn't use this, put this there, give me this, put me in the hospital for my own good, because in that time in the hospital, there was some significant like heart work that had to happen, where I was confronted with some failures, some idols, some things in my own heart that needed to be dealt with that hadn't been dealt with. And a lot of that is because I hadn't really slowed down long enough to deal with it. And I hadn't focused on my own relationship with Christ as much as I should, and just some things like that. And so what ended up happening in the midst of this difficult, painful experience was I was able to experience, number one, some repentance and forgiveness that needed to happen just in my own relationship with God, and realizing some areas where I'd been neglectful, where I'd been self-dependent, where I'd been even bitter, angry, ungrateful, like some attitudes like that needed to be dealt with. So that was the first thing. The second thing was experiencing sort of a renewed joy in God. So I wrote an article on my blog about how pain serves our joy, or suffering serves our joy, and just some reflections on that, and experiencing some joy in the midst of that. Even being thankful in a new way for my kids and my wife, things like that, things that we can tend to take for granted. And then the third thing that sort of came out of it was sort of a renewed love for the church, a renewed sense of belonging to the church. Because one of the things that I've struggled with personally is feeling like I'm a pastor, I'm not a member. Where my job is the church. I mean, that's my job. And so, feeling like I need to be a member of a church too, like I need that fellowship. I need that relationship. I need that care. I need that ministry, just like other people do. And God just used this to show me that was just a really crummy attitude that was unwarranted. And, just the way that people were praying for me, the way that people were reaching out, the way to caring for my family, it just allowed me to see in a different way, something that I think has been there, but I'd been blinded to, or hadn't been focusing on, or hadn't had the right perspective on. So in the midst of this really difficult, painful experience, it was really a good thing. Like, it was a good blessing. It was a gift, because all of those things came out of that. And for me, personally, like, I don't, like we've talked about this, but it seems like in ministry, you're always dealing with some sort of suffering for somebody. Like, in a church our size, you've always got somebody that's hurting. You've always got somebody that's in pain. You've got people dying. You've got people being diagnosed with cancer. You've got people that are going through difficulty in their marriages. You got people that are going through difficulty in parenting. You got people that are losing friends, that are experiencing loss of a different kind. Like maybe they've gotten in a car accident. Some of their dreams have gotten killed or whatever. You just live in this space where suffering is happening, and you can become kind of detached from it. And so it gave me a new empathy, a new compassion. I think that I needed, that I'd gotten sort of cold toward. So yeah, I think it was a good thing. It was a painful thing. It was an annoying thing at times. It was a frustrating thing, but ultimately, I think God used that to chip away some of the edges that would have, I think, really destroyed me if they hadn't been addressed, in bitterness or in anger or in self-entitlement or some of those other things that I can get prone toward, discouragement. So yeah, it was sort of like one of those things. Like your sermon on Sunday, I really appreciate it. I thought it was really, really good. Maybe not only, but more so, I think, because of some of the things that we've walked through in the last month or so. So yeah, that was sort of where that sort of landed for me.
Right. And so you have no diagnosis, though.
Yeah, no, I still don't know what's going on.
And you still are on pain meds.
Yeah, sort of weaning off of them, but yeah. And so that's one of the things, like I told Jeff, I was like, it seems like by now I'd figure out that God should be able to get my attention a little bit easier. Like maybe not be so bullheaded anymore, because when those things happen, like, I mean, it seems like things like this are, at least in this instance, there was no diagnosis, there was no answer. It's sort of like this weird medical mystery, and now the pain is subsiding and going away. It's kind of like God was like, all right, you need to learn this lesson. I'm going to put you in a situation where you have to learn it the hard way because you won't learn it the easy way. You know what I mean? And so I don't know exactly what it was that caused that pain or anything like that, but medically it still hasn't been diagnosed. But yeah, it just felt like this was like, and even my pace and my pace prevented me from dealing with some of these things. Like one of the things that I really got convicted on is you shouldn't have to be put on your back in the hospital to remind you to spend time with God. And sort of going back to what you were saying, where you're not spending time with God for other people.
Yeah.
You're spending time with God for yourself. And slowing down and realizing some of the things that are important in life that can get lost in the rat race of busyness.
Yeah.
And sort of it gave me some new perspective for us as a church, and maybe where we need to move forward in some areas where I've been contributing to some of the struggles that we've had, but also sort of a new perspective and a new excitement for ministry going forward, and maybe what God can do with the church, and just being content with the church that God's given us to shepherd, and not wishing that it was something else, you know?
It's been a weird, like, I've been filling the pulpit while you're gone. So I don't think I've filled quite a bit, in our 5 years together, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But not in, like, this will be the fifth sermon in a row. So I think maybe I've gained a little more respect for the process, for the grind that it can be, for the weightiness of it. Like, I thought it was weighty, but when you just do a sermon here and a sermon there, and they're coming.
Yeah.
You've got a little more prep time where you're going week to week, and you're going from text to text. You really only have the ability to look at that text one at a time.
Yeah.
And just there's so yeah, I just have I think a newfound respect. I also have I feel like a new love for doing it.
Yeah.
Where before it was more of my own process of working through that. And it's funny how God uses your suffering to grow me to where it was now that preparation is, I think, a little more God dependent.
Yeah.
A little more. I'm not seeing something.
Help me to see. I've got to preach in 3 days. Please help me to see something.
I'm pretty structured. And so I want to have, phrases and points that will help people to think back and say, okay, I understand what that was at, and just having a hard time with those.
Yeah.
This last text I did, I was like, I know what I want people to see, but I
don't know how to tell them. It just
comes out as complete nonsense that doesn't make any connections. And so I went all the way. Normally I have my manuscript done by Thursday, and that one I didn't have done until Friday evening.
Yeah, which is probably pretty stressful for you.
Yeah, very stressful. But even like you first went to the hospital on Saturday night.
Yeah, you had like 4 hours to throw something together.
It was like 10:30.
Yeah, I remember. I texted you. I felt so bad about texting you, but I was like, I cannot get up there.
So I like having that little time. Like, okay, I'm just gonna have to trust that, because I'll have one chance to get this all together.
Yeah,
I don't get no review. There's no double checking. I'm gonna trust that God's going to guide me here. And then even in the second time was kind of the same way, because you kind of thought, okay, I'll be over it. And then it was Friday night.
Yeah.
And I can't do it. And you were back in the hospital again.
And then after that, everybody learned, and they're like, okay, you're not going to do it until we tell you can, until you've had like a solid week of
after
being
that.
Okay.
But even in working through those, I think that, like, God's taught me a lot in that time and we've talked a lot about, just as friends, there's like a barrier of self-doubt in my own life, because people tend to look at or I feel, I don't think people actually do this, but I feel like people look at me as a second rate pastor because I don't have the degree and I haven't done the schooling. I've done it and we've talked about whether that's worth anything or not. It is, but
but also isn't.
Yeah, we devalue the spiritual calling
Yeah.
in place of the educational piece. So I struggle with that, but I think it was also rewarding. And God telling me, I have called you to this.
Yeah.
I've given you the gifting to do this. You work hard for my glory. And I think just showing me that my labor is not in vain.
Yeah.
As I think that's in 1 Corinthians 15.
Yeah.
That knowing that your labor is not in vain as you work for the Lord. So sometimes I think I can get hit like in my own selfishness and in my own like personal sin issues. Those will get in the way of, I'm just here.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it should, if nothing else, it should have been affirming because one of the things that for me, this is like this. So I have a high view of Sunday morning. I have a high view of preaching and singing, basically worship. But congregational worship, like those are essential elements. I think the essential element of what it means to be the church is to gather for the corporate worship, public worship of God. And there's something significant that happens in that, even though we might not feel it or see it every week. There's something cumulative and significant that happens in that. That's why God has specifically commanded us to do that. And so that's a big deal for me. Like preaching is a weighty thing. Because you're rightly dividing the word of God. You are speaking on behalf of God before the people of God, and you're going to give an account for that. So there's a lot of weight to that. And one of the things that this should be really affirming for you in two ways. Number one, I had no problem calling you 6 hours before you're supposed to preach and saying, hey, like I felt bad, like because I know how you're wired, and I knew it was going to be stressful for you, but I didn't have any doubt that everything was going to be fine. Like I didn't even ask about it. You know, it's like one of those things where it's just, all right, I can forget about this now. But also just in hearing some of the feedback from some of the different people, either through text message or through Facebook messages or people coming to visit, the affirmation of how God is still working through that and how he's using you to bless and serve the body in that way and that gifting there. So like, I want to just maybe highlight two things. We've probably, I don't have a timer in front of me. I don't know how long we've gone, but you see that? Is it like 50 minutes now?
Yes.
Something like that. Okay. So I just want to highlight two things, two other things that maybe I've learned in this process that I think are significant for people listening. The first one is, I had two pastors come and visit me. Gillespie came, actually three. Gillespie came, Fletcher came, and over the course of this month, like this month-long ordeal at different points when I was in the hospital, and you came. Sealock, if you're listening, I hold it against you. You, he texted and he knows me, so he's like, you probably don't want anybody to come and visit you, huh? And I said, nope, I'm good. Yeah. So I had contact with all four of my pastors. Three of them came and visited me. But all three of them knew me well enough to know, okay, like, I'm just going to stay for a few minutes to let you know that I care about you. Beyond that, though, there were other members of the church that came and visited me. Mm-hmm. And those other members of the church coming and visiting me, they were short visits. They were just check in, letting you know I care about you, letting you know I'm praying for you. Some of them were not in person. Some of them were through Facebook message or email, or Carly got a card, or even somebody came and mowed our lawn. Yeah. And Carly told me about that. That was like, there wasn't a visit, but it was like, okay, people care. They're taking, I can rest now. Like I don't have to worry about stuff at home. Like I know that there are people that'll help if we need something. That is the ministry of the church to the church. So it just reaffirmed in my mind, like there's no special, access to God that some pastor has. There's no special juice or special sauce that some pastor has access to, where when they come and visit you, it's somehow more significant or more important or more ministry than if somebody else comes and visits you. You know, there's a couple here, Ralph and Sandy. Sandy was texting me like almost every day, and she was like, "I'm sorry, I just want to make sure you're okay." And I appreciated that so much. We had friends that stepped in and were like, you got to let us do something. We want to help you guys. I had people from the church, you had people from the church coming up to you and asking you about, and my only point is that I realize that some of that happened because I'm the preaching pastor and I'm up front every Sunday and I'm in contact with a lot of people, but that should be the reality for us as the church. That's church ministry. And that's something that everybody can do.
Yeah.
That's such an important role that we discount and devalue. So if you're listening to this, get connected with some people in your church. And if you hear of somebody in your church that is sick or that is suffering or that's going through, don't underestimate the value. Even if you don't know them well, don't underestimate the value of calling or sending an email and just reaffirming that you're praying for them and then actually doing that. Because that was the other thing. I knew that everybody was actually doing that. And it was a huge blessing. And so the first sort of wrap up thing for me was be the church. That's what it means to be the church. That's what it means to do ministry to one another in the church. And for me, that was just so affirming and encouraging and gave me such a vision for what the church what church ministry could be like if we can all get a hold of that and do that for one another as we hear and have opportunity to do that. The second thing was God uses, I think, our suffering and our struggle in people's lives that are in our lives. And so you alluded to this earlier, but God used this thing with me to work on some stuff in you.
Right.
And so there's such value in having relationships with other believers and other people in the body. And beyond the superficial Sunday morning, how are you? But to where you really know one another, you really have that connection to where when God's working on something in somebody's life, he's really working on it in your life too. And you're benefiting from the struggle that somebody else is having, and they're benefiting from you being there for them. And it's this reciprocal weird thing. But just I think sometimes we're so afraid of getting hurt, or we're so afraid of letting people in, seeing how broken we are, people seeing how frail we are, people seeing how vulnerable we can be, and how sin is in our lives, and these failures and these struggles that we have, that we miss out not only on the blessing of having those people in our lives, but miss out on the blessing of benefiting from things that other people go through that you walk through with them. So those were sort of the other two big things that came out of this for me as I think about suffering. So any sort of final thoughts that you have?
I'll just mention a couple of things. So one of the things that I find very difficult, especially with people who are friends, just from a shepherding standpoint, is to remember that you're one of their shepherds too. And so while we are friends and our family loves your family, I'm also like one of you. Like it's seeing one of the fellow pastors, and this is true for Gillespie and for Fletcher and for Sealock too. But seeing you guys as hey, John needs shepherded right now. Like I had to go when I visited 3 times probably. In this month, and I specifically the first time I don't think I did a good job, and then the next 2 times I was like, okay, I need to not just be his friend, I want to do that, but if there's areas where we need to be shepherding, then we need to do that. We need to do that for each other. So fellow pastors, you need to do that for each other and not neglect that piece. I think God kind of exposed that in our friendship through this trial. And then just the other thing, just over the last 6 months, and even especially in these 5 weeks, stop looking at, like, we focus in so much on all of the stuff that's going on and how it just seems bad and how this seems terrible. And man, I can't believe these things are happening. And we pray and we hope for those things to just stop.
Yeah.
And as I've walked through these last 6 months with you, and just hurting for you, and the stuff within my own life and my own family, and working through that text in Genesis and seeing how God is working, is like, we need to stop focusing on all of the these little things. We are just a dot in this in God's canvas of history, and it's like you got to realize like we're gonna exist for eternity, and this life is just a dot.
Yeah.
And that can be all we focus on. We put these blinders on. It's all we look at. And so just God exposing my narrowness as a person, and always focusing on the little things and all the things that stink in life, and getting down about those things. And he's kind of pulled my eyes away from those things, and has been telling me, look up.
Yeah.
Look at what I'm doing. Look at how I'm working. Look at how I'm faithful. Stop looking at these things. These things should be pointing you to me.
I saw that in a really unique way. So like, so Sydney messaged me, your sister-in-law, Sydney messaged me. For those that are listening that don't know Sydney, I know you know who she is, but she messaged me and she said that James has been asking to pray for Uncle John, and she's given up on explaining that I'm not part of the family. So James plays with our girls, and is about the same age as Finley. And so like this thing that I'm going through is an opportunity to teach James, for James' mom and dad to teach him something. Finley came up to me last night. She goes, "Papa, I'm glad you're home." I said, "I'm glad I'm home too, baby." She goes, you didn't feel good. That's why you were in the hospital. I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You feel okay now?" I said, "Yeah, I feel a lot better, baby." And she said, "If you feel sick, then you'll have to go back to the hospital." I said, "Yeah, maybe." She goes, "Okay, well, if that happens, then we'll pray for you." So this garbage that I was going through was being used by God to teach my daughter something about prayer. So you don't realize the implications of what God is doing. And we do tend to get really focused. Like I was really focused on it. Like, God, make this pain go away, please, for the love of all that is good. But my daughter saw how I walked through that. Other people saw how I walked through that. There were opportunities to minister to nurses and to doctors. Right. And there's just all sorts of stuff that we don't see. Yeah. So yeah, take your eyes off of this momentary light affliction, and see how it's preparing you for eternal weight of glory.
Yeah. Don't look at the things that are passing away. Look to the things that don't. So,
exactly.
So I think God's taught probably both of us a lot through what feels like a lot of suffering, but in the grand scheme of things,
it's not much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we're part of the Bar Podcast Network. You can find out more about them and get more great biblical content for your ear holes at thebarpodcast.com. Check out resurrectioncoffeeco.com. And we will be back next week with something. Hopefully. Lord willing.
That is our plan. So
you foolish people who say I will go to such and such a town and spend a year. So yeah, we'll have something for you next week, hopefully. And we'd like to hear your feedback. Like if you've what have you learned from suffering? What have you experienced in your own trials and struggles? How does this stuff resonate with you? Have you seen God working in these ways in your own life? We'd like to hear about it. You can go on Facebook and let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear about that.
All right, so hope you do that, and join us next week for the next episode of the Pastor Discussions Podcast, your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.